Hi everyone, good afternoon. I think we're probably just about ready to start. So I'd like to introduce myself. My name's Amy Carr and I'm the Director of Fundraising and Marketing at Focus Island. And from all the team at Focus Island, I hope you're keeping really safe and well during the pandemic. I'm delighted to welcome you to Focus Island's first ever virtual Women's Philanthropy Circle meeting. Thank you for joining us today. I'm actually very excited about this meeting for three reasons. Firstly, a virtual event means that we're able to welcome our supporters and colleagues from across the country, and those members who haven't been able to make the early morning meetings in Dublin that we do. So it's great to have you here, and thanks so much for joining us today. Secondly, this is not a breakfast meeting, and I, like so many of you who attend our breakfast meetings regularly, got an extra hour in bed this morning. And thirdly, and most importantly, this afternoon I'm joined by two fantastic speakers. Shortly, we're going to hear from our special guest speaker, Annette Hickey, who's Vice President of Global Customer Solutions, EMEA at PayPal. And after Annette, we'll hear from Niamh Lambe, who's Project Manager for Focus Island's Family Homeless Action Team. But before I make those introductions, I'd just like to take a few minutes to briefly talk to you about COVID-19 and homelessness and its impact on Focus Island, and to bring you through our response to the pandemic. So at our last Women's Philanthropy Circle back in January, I remember talking to a number of our members about COVID-19. At that stage, it was a virus in Asia, and we were discussing what would happen if it was to arrive in Ireland. Those conversations happened face to face, and I suspect that we were less than a few inches apart in some cases. And something that on that day I definitely took for granted, because less than 6 weeks after that meeting, our services and the homeless landscape changed dramatically. And as an organisation, we've been met with our fair share of challenges, but also with opportunities and some really, really significant learnings. The whole organisation responded really quickly to the changing environment. From fundraising, and like this meeting, we've been doing a lot of our activities online, to our property team, to our HR team. But our frontline service teams showed exceptional flexibility in responding to the pandemic to ensure that we could continue to be there for the people who needed us most at a time when they needed us the most. And subsequently, they have shown incredible resilience and compassion every single day. The work that has been done by our dedicated frontline staff is really inspiring. During the lockdown period, we've been able to manage to move on a record total of 280 families into safe and secure homes. And this includes over 400 children who now have a safe place to call home. And we're continuing to work with the 500 families who are still living in emergency accommodation. Many of these move-ons have been made possible because of the availability of holiday rentals that came back onto the market. And we've been able to secure long-term rental contracts for these properties for our customers. And our advocacy and service team are now working in parallel to ensure that these tenancies can be maintained well into the future. All of our frontline services have remained open. They've seen increased demand, and we've managed to look after that increased demand. All staff and services have adapted to the guidelines set out by the government to slow the spread of COVID-19. Where possible, our support workers are holding appointments online or over the phone to continue to engage our customers in that really vital key work. And we've also opened a temporary cocooning facility for vulnerable people who are over the age of 70, or for those that have specific health needs and would be particularly vulnerable to COVID-19. So we've had some really positive outcomes and learnings, and now we're focused on what needs to happen as the restrictions are eased. To this end, at the end of May, Focus Island wrote to Minister Owen Murphy with a roadmap for housing and homelessness. The roadmap outlined the need to secure the safety of the most vulnerable homeless people, to keep the momentum going and maintain the gains COVID-19 has enabled as part of the new normal, and to ensure that when the protections that have been enabled during COVID-19 have been lifted, that we don't see a new wave of homelessness. For example, for those people who may be in rental arrears or mortgage arrears. Our advocacy team will continue to have these discussions with the government on the proposed roadmap. And that brings me on to the formation of the new government, and really good news for Focus Island this week and for the community at large is that 4 out of the 5 asks that we put into the government have been included in the new programme for the formation of the new government. Focus Island asks that the government commit to build at least 35,000 new homes a year, to hold a referendum to put stronger housing rights in the Constitution, and to establish a National Commission on Housing. And most pertinent for you, for the members of the Women's Philanthropy Circle and what we're trying to achieve, the 4th ask that we made was the government would pledge to develop a new youth housing and homeless strategy. The inclusion of these recommendations, along with some key actions for ending homelessness, we feel are really promising. During COVID-19, there's also been some key achievements for young people that I'm delighted to let you know about 3 this afternoon. Firstly, we launched a new app called the Leaving Well app. This is a mobile app for aftercare workers and care leavers. So aftercare is a programme that helps young people make the transition to independent living from state care at the age of 18. This is a cohort and a period of time when these young people are particularly vulnerable to homelessness. So the app allows them to have stronger and more effective communications around their aftercare plan. It gives young people more ownership of their aftercare plan, and it will yield really useful data in terms of the outcomes for young people. The app has been recognised as best practice in the UK and has been adapted for the Irish context. We've done that in consultation with TUSLA so that we can roll it out. Secondly, our extension day services for young people are back open and part-time, and staff are seeing young people and engaging with them again. This service is for young people who may be living in adult hostel accommodation and who really require the extra supports. So it's great news that these young people are receiving the help that they need to exit homelessness. And finally, we're about to launch on an advocacy campaign to look at prevention strategies for low-income workers or for those who are vulnerable to becoming economically homeless during COVID-19. So this is targeted really at students, at those who have precarious work contracts, and for single parents where childcare has not returned and they may not be able to return to work. For the young people and students in particular, it will look at the for those students who may live 52 weeks of the year in student accommodation. So we're really excited to undertake this piece of work. But as always, the work we do is a team effort, and I'm so grateful to you, our supporters, who have allowed us to continue to help those that need us the most. And on that note, it's with great pleasure that I'm about to introduce you to Annette Hickey. Annette is PayPal's Vice President of Global Customer Solutions for EMEA. She leads over 1,000 PayPal teammates across Dublin, Dundalk and Dublin, as well as 10 of PayPal's global partners. And prior to PayPal, Annette worked for Vodafone, leading its contact centre and implementing transformative change. And prior to that in Aircom, where she managed the team through the transition from Telcom Éireann, modernising, rebranding and rebuilding the culture. Annette is also a mum to 2 young boys, and in the midst of the packed schedule, she ensures that she supports her beloved Dublin GAA. I first met Annette in the lobby of Davy before a Women's Philanthropy Circle meeting in February 2019, where she was waiting for 2 of her colleagues and friends from PayPal, one of whom was May Dorman, the guest speaker that morning. And another was Louise Phelan, who is also a former Women's Philanthropy Circle speaker. That day that I met Annette, one of the things that struck me was the way that these amazing, talented women supported each other. Not just that day, but through their careers at PayPal, and I suspect well into the future. And Focus Island have been so fortunate to be recipients of that amazing support and energy. The long-standing relationship that we have with Annette and her personal support of Focus Island and ending youth homelessness is something that we're really grateful for. But more than that, Annette has championed us within PayPal, securing a donation for KK, which is our North Dublin aftercare programme this year. She's also listened to our ideas and has been a sounding board for a big new project that we rolled out, providing us with really vital guidance, feedback and support. So I am delighted to hand you over to Annette Hickey.
Well, thank you, Amy, for that lovely, warm and very flattering introduction. Delighted to be here this morning for the, it's afternoon now, for the first, I think, virtual Philanthropy Circle. And we're grateful for the opportunity to speak this morning. Always important to know, I suppose, not only the material you're going to talk about, but your audience. And I know what's on here are about 36 confident, successful women who I'm sure all have their own stories about how you got here today. But I'm here this morning to share a little bit of my own story, so please bear with me. As the introduction from Amy there, I work in PayPal and I manage committed customer care teammates out of Dublin, Dundalk and Tel Aviv, and a number of the outsourced partners which are based everywhere from Manila to Costa Rica and many places in between. So COVID has given me the opportunity to keep the feet on the ground and not be in the air for most of the month, which is wonderful. In our centres, we service all the EMEA customers through 17 different languages and deal with 40,000 customer contacts every single day over messaging, phone and email. And I suppose it's my responsibility to set them up for success. And valuing my people and their contribution, I suppose, is the best way I think that I can do that. I've been with the company now, it'll be 6 years this September, and so far it's been working out great. And what Amy said there is with the help of some great people in the organisation. I know Maeve is on the call today. I wouldn't be surprised if Louise has. She hasn't pinged me yet, but I don't know if she's on the call, but she may be. But they've been a great help to me in my PayPal career, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But when I look back at my career, and in fact, my life change and the ability to adapt to different situations has been a constant since I was, I suppose, a little girl. When I was 5 or 6, I was a scrawny, shy thing who wouldn't say boo to it, was very, very shy. And my mum, who'd been a big influence on me, was stay at home. And she gave up her job after she got married. I think, it was all the married girls did that. To free up employment in the 60s, you had to do that. My dad was an entrepreneur. He had a butcher shop and some properties, and he used to come home from a day on his feet and dealing with customers all day and regale us with his stories. But he'd always have his dinner handed to him, and as soon as the dinner was finished, he'd go in and sit in the sitting room, put up the feet and call one of us to bring him in the cup of tea. And I remember questioning him once why he didn't help with the dishes or make his own cup of tea, and he'd tell us that he'd done his own, he had actually done his day's work and this was his downtime. I remember even at the time thinking, I've seen Mammy working really hard all day today with us, and everything from, the housework to bringing us here and there and, making the dinner and whatever. But he never really put any value, I suppose, in that work. And suppose, that was something that was always, irked me when I was even a child. When I was about 12, my mum and dad's marriage broke down. I guess he mustn't have liked the dinners or the tea too much. And it wasn't really very acrimonious. My mother then, though, she had no finances of her own to fall back on, and she took on cleaning jobs. So she'd have money in her purse. And I remember, at the time, people turning their back on my mum. It was kind of embarrassing at the time to be a woman whose marriage had broken down, and surely she must have done something wrong. But it was women mostly who had turned their back on her. And for me, it was a very tough and confusing time. And the insecurity that entered the house then was like a black cloud, and I suppose had a huge impact on me. And I remember feeling very confused and constantly embarrassed by the situation, going to school and so on. But every time I needed books, it would be ask your dad, and my dad saying, I gave money to your mum, and this was the whole kind of thing. So he just stopped asking and did without. But I think it made me more resilient and determined to be financially independent. And I suppose that has heavily influenced my value set. And, you know, the family, my sisters and my brother, we all came through it. And looking back, it's true I suppose what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And my dad and my mum, while they, you know, continued to live separately and eventually divorced, they compromised and life returned to a new normality. My sisters and I, we went to the local Holy Faith school where I got an OK Leaving cert. And it was really funny because my mom was, she was, you know, always making sure that her girls didn't get above the station. In fact, I often laugh about this. She wanted me to get a job in Superquinn because all of the nice girls and Mrs. Malone's girls were lovely and they worked in Superquinn, or maybe a hairdresser, because that would be lovely too, because it was always good to have a hairdresser in the family and there'd always be work for hairdressers. But I had different ideas and went to college and got a marketing degree. And while I was studying, I got a part-time job earning £6 a night as a lounge girl in a pub in the Glenside in Churchtown, if anyone knows it. And if I wanted tips, I had to leave the shy girl at the door. So that, I suppose, was life-changing and really shaped my personality to, I suppose, the extrovert, or the more extrovert than I was, certainly as a young girl. My first experience of a proper job actually was on the reception of Davies Stockbrokers, and Mara is on this morning, where I worked as a temp for a few months before I took up a role in as another receptionist role in a field marketing company called CPM. And one afternoon while I was on reception, a prospective client called in looking for a proposal. It was a particularly busy day. People were out and about, clients, and there was no one on hand to give the particular piece of business to in the back. And so I did it myself right there in reception, and we were looking for a piece of market research, and the client was Aer Lingus, and we landed the account, and the account looked for me to work it. So I was moved off reception into the back office, delighted with myself, and handed the Aer Lingus account plus another account, which was Avonmore, and that's now Glanbia. And after about a year or so on the account, I applied and I was successful for a role as assistant brand manager to use, I suppose, my marketing experience in Avonmore itself. But there was a salary cut, and if I remember back at that time, I was on £12,500 in CPM, and I went to £10,500 in Glanbia. And it was a one-year contract, so it was a bit risky in a depressed Irish economy of the early 90s. I started off working on dairy spreads, and then soup, and then cheese, and then finally got the creme de la creme of Yoplait yogurt. And I moved on from Glanbia after about 5 years, had a ball there, to Aircom, to the marketing team. And after about a year in the marketing team, I applied for a role as head of online. So I'd throw my hat in the ring, knowing full well and knowing my technical skills that I wasn't going to get it. But lo and behold, I got the job and then had to figure out how to do it. But after a couple of years in that role, I was asked to lead the telesales team, which was a much bigger role. Had about 200 teammates in the telesales team, and was known as the jewel in the sales crown. I worked at the time for an amazing boss. His name was Jerry Culligan, and he now is, as far as I know, he is the Chief Commercial Officer in Irish Rail. But he constantly fed me with positivity. And we had great times and great successes on my teams. And my telesales team won awards in Ireland. And then we went on to win them in Europe. And then we even won one at a global level, which was fab. And there was a great culture in Aircom. That was the thing I remember. The culture was fantastic. It was one of comradeship, of celebration, and I thrived under that. I was promoted a couple of times and was very financially secure and really, feeling good about myself at that time. And my career then took me to another telecom, which Amy mentioned there was Vodafone, where the job was to streamline the contact centre, which was lacking in processes and inefficient. It just was an organisation that had gone from zero to hero, and then the structures, I suppose, and processes were following behind afterwards. The ask was simple, and it was to reduce the contact centre costs by about 30% and increase customer sat to best in class. So one kind of contradicts the other, but we had our mojo. I had shaped a great team, and we successfully did both, which was fab. I was working for a great organisation, Vodafone, but the culture kind of wasn't me. It was different to what I was used to. It was more competitive as opposed to comradeship, and it didn't really play to the values that I had stayed true to since childhood. And then I went for a promotion, which I didn't get, and somebody more successful and more fitting got it, which was great. But I came to a crossroads and knew I had to do one of two things, either put up or shut up. So I kind of knew I was out of road in Vodafone, but I was hungry for more, and I knew there was more in me. But I also knew that my next role was key. I was looking for an organisation that played to my values, where I could be stretched, where I could be challenged, and where my voice mattered, and where I could actually just be myself. I took 6 months out and spent a glorious summer with my two boys. After, I think it was 20 interviews. I think it was about 20 interviews. I think I met nearly everybody in the organisation at a particular level. I accepted the role in PayPal, and working with Maeve and Louise, which at the time was part of eBay, and that was in 2014. I was only about a month in the organisation when they announced the split from eBay, and there was going to be major organisation transformation, which was hugely exciting because it was a great opportunity to develop our own culture and our own processes and systems. And internally, I suppose, we used the opportunity to build our brand as a safe and secure independent online payments provider. And internally, we defined what matters most to us, which was our culture. Our CEO is a gentleman called Dan Schulman, who's based over in the US, and he had a mission and a vision that the organization it would be values and ethics driven and built on 4 pillars, which is inclusion, collaboration, wellness, and innovation. And these pillars were built from bottom up with top-down support, which you know is critical, and guide our actions, I suppose. And I felt, and I continue every day to feel inspired in the organisation where I work. Our mission is around democratising financial services, which simply means making financial services available to everybody. And that starts from the inside, building, I suppose, a global team of employees that reflects the communities and the customers that we serve. And that's why inclusion is a core value that defines who we are in everything we do, and bringing this to life, building an ever-inclusive culture and respecting individual differences, life experiences and knowledge, and self-expression as well of our colleagues. Only last week, our CEO announced a 500 million fund to support Black-owned SMBs and their communities across the world, which is phenomenal, and makes me even more proud to work for this organisation. But there are clearly many aspects of the ecosystem that make PayPal a success, but the greatest asset has to be our people and the people that we attract and retain in our organisation. I suppose they're the ones that turn up every day to deliver for our customers, and we have 24,000 people across the globe and have some encouraging progress in terms of diversity and inclusion. We have gender equality, 43% of the workplace are female, and if I remember, we have a 20% increase year on year at vice president level. I was promoted to vice president, much to my own surprise, last April, with the support of women like Louise and actually who had gone from the organisation, but certainly Maeve Dorman was one of the spokespeople who spoke out for me in making it happen, and it really has been a life-changing promotion for me in my career. Our board is 50% comprised of women and underrepresented ethnic groups, and we have pay equality in salaries for men and women. When I look at kind of my personal transformation, self-confidence and belief, I suppose, came from inside and outside factors. Your network, people you hang around with, your company, and its culture plays a huge part. You know, societies and organizations like this circle plays a part in what we do and how we behave. But for me, I suppose the biggest change in my life wasn't becoming a senior leader. It was becoming a mother and having to juggle priorities and commitments with a busy role. And the role had a lot of responsibility. And I've always had roles with a lot of responsibility. And how was I going to do both, and how I managed to do both? It's definitely not something that you'd ever regret, but it's something to learn to grow into, I suppose, and figure out how to balance it. But what I do regret, though, and this may be something that other women on this Zoom call do or did, is for a good few years, I held myself back. When I was about 28, maybe 29, we decided to start a family, and I made a conscious decision not to go for promotions or interviews or put my hand up or take on extra responsibilities. I felt it would be, probably harder on me but really unfair to my employer. I mean, how could I be asking for a bigger job while I was planning on starting a family? How could, I take on promotions or, make myself busy and throw something in when I was going to have to leave next summer, because that's where I thought I was going to land. But for my husband and I, like many couples, it wasn't easy as just deciding to have children and have the summer off. For 8 years, I found myself in a situation where I was holding myself back in the pure hope that someday I'd have extra commitments to balance. But for 8 years, it didn't happen. And luckily at the very end of my journey, my husband and I adopted 2 amazing boys, and we're a lovely family life now that we had longed for. But I suppose if you're in that predicament, or if you have someone on your team you think might be, I'd really encourage you not to let life hold you or them back, and not to let opportunities pass you by. And my best advice as a business person and as a mother and even as a woman is to, I suppose, go for what you want in all aspects of your life. It will work out. Some things are, like it was for me, out of your control, and other things are within your control. And what you can do, most importantly, is just to, keep going and not to tame your ambition, and don't let anybody else do that for you either. Because as we all know, it's ambition that powers our personal change. The advice I often give women to my network, because we really encourage women in PayPal to mentor other women inside and outside of our organization, is to have courage and be brave and ask for the pay rise or ask for the job. And if your own job isn't working out for you, or you feel you have more to give, like I did at one point, then move on. It's rare that you hear of somebody who moved from an organization and regretted it. It's like saying, don't let previous setbacks be your holdbacks as well. We're all going to make mistakes as we jump in. We've got to learn from them and move on. And if we're going to make a change, and most jobs, I suppose, demand that you change the status quo, make it a big change, go for it. You mess up, you'll also be known for it, but usually they turn out right if you take your time. And build a great team and surround yourself with people more talented than you, and colleagues and people who are going to support you and give you that support. There's no room for negativity or those voices. We've enough of them inside our own heads without having people beside us, left or right, telling us what we can't do. You need positivity around you, and that's something I've certainly surrounded myself. And for women who get to a certain level, like a lot of people on this call, make sure, as an expression from a good Galway woman said, is send the elevator back down to help other women on their way, because there's a special place in hell for people who hold other women back. And don't hold yourself back either, and never check out like I did until you actually need to. And finally, as I put on the wall in PayPal, it's a little ode to me, but it's to be yourself, because if you try to be somebody else, you'll find that spot is taken. So I'll hand it back to you, Amy for the rest of the conversation. But really loved chatting to you, and if there's any questions in a little while, I'll be very happy to take them.
Thanks, Annette. I mean, it's so great for you to share such personal journey as well, and personal story, and I'm sure there'll be a huge amount of questions for you at the end. Yeah, I found that really interesting and really motivating, so thank you. Just to remind people that Annette and Niamh, after we hear from Niamh, will be around to take questions at the end, and you can submit your questions through the Q&A function, and we'll have about 10, maybe 15 minutes at the end to answer some of those questions. But for now, I'm going to introduce you to my colleague, Niamh Lambe. Usually at this stage, we hear from someone who is in our youth services, working on youth services, that's the work that is supported by this circle. But with the amazing work that's been happening, moving families on from homelessness during COVID-19, we decided that we would deviate slightly from our normal plan. So Niamh is joining us. She's worked for Focus Ireland for 15 years across a number of our services, including our youth services, and she currently manages the Family Homeless Action Team. I mentioned earlier that they're having huge success moving families on from homelessness. They're currently moving about 5 to 6 families on a day from homelessness during COVID-19. Normally it's around 2 families a day, so it's an incredible achievement, and it puts us in a real position to change the homeless landscape. But Niamh also has experience, as I said, across a number of our programmes, including the work that we do with young people. And today, Niamh will be talking about kind of intergenerational homelessness, how breaking the cycle of homelessness is essential to ending homelessness for good. So I'm going to hand you straight over to Niamh's capable hands.
Thank you, Amy. It's lovely to connect with you all today and to talk about something that I'm very, very passionate about, which is family homelessness and intergenerational homelessness, and what we can do to improve homelessness in Dublin, Ireland, worldwide, what we can do to improve the circumstances for youth homelessness in particular. I was very inspired by Annette's piece. It's amazing to be around such amazing women that have progressed through. I was touched by when Annette said about women not holding each other back, because what struck me in that piece was that the youth, the homeless youths that we work with are at such a disadvantage from the get-go. They are held back, they are marginalised, they have less opportunity than our own children. I look at my 2 kiddies, and my biggest concern is multitasking at home and being a Montessori mum and a junior infants teacher at the moment, trying to manage all that. But they're resilient and they're getting on with things and they're okay, whereas the homeless children that we work with have a lot more to get through, the struggles of cramped accommodation and so on. It's a very difficult terrain that they're in. So I'm going to talk a little bit around youth homelessness, and I'll draw on some of the experiences that I've had in the various services in Focus Ireland and that intergenerational piece. So just to begin with, I'd just like you all just to imagine the spectrum of homelessness, from the child at the beginning of homelessness to the adult at the end. So if you can try and think about the adult, in the past, we have stereotyped homelessness. I'm saying that broadly, of course, I'm not saying you all have, but in the past we have done that. We have looked at that homeless person, maybe stereotyped them as, you know, a street drinker, or, you know, the negative connotations that come with homelessness. But if we compare it back to the child who's homeless, at the moment, my team works with up to 500 families in the Dublin region alone who are in hotels and private emergency accommodation all over Dublin. There's over 800 children linked to the service that I manage. And behind all these adults that are their parents, they have experienced what is called adverse childhood experiences in their past. I work as a psychotherapist in private practice as well, so I feel quite passionate around the understanding behind why we become homeless and to work from a trauma-informed approach. So as Annette referred to there earlier on, if you don't mind me drawing on this piece, Annette, around, you mentioned a divorce in your childhood. Most of us have had an adverse childhood experience. It could be a significant bereavement when we were children. It could be more severe, like domestic violence. But some of us will have had one or so adverse childhood experiences. Unfortunately, homeless children experience much more than that. 42% of homeless children have 4 or 5 adverse childhood experiences. So if you can imagine what's going on in their worlds, there could be mental health issues, addiction issues, there could be divorce, there could be abuse, so there's a lot going on for homeless families. So when we look at the homeless cohorts that we work with, it's important to recognize that they have a lot of supports that they need, and they're quite marginalized in what's being offered to them. So the intergenerational piece is something that Focus Ireland, I think we have become very strong at working on. We have a very strong strategy. We work with preventing homelessness and sustained exits. So preventing the children that are linked to these families that are currently homeless. We do not want to see them to come back into the cycle of homelessness. In the past, we have seen that. We have seen teenagers in families, and then I have seen them present to teams that they have then become homeless themselves. So we've become very, very good at advocating for our children. We're at the forefront of providing early intervention as a homeless organisation. To give you an example, one of my very first teams in Focus Ireland back in 2003 was called the settlement team at the time. And it was quite a new approach. So we had child support workers working on the team. And people would say, child support workers, that's lovely, they're coming along to play with the children. We were saying, no, it's so much more than that. So the child support workers do therapeutic play with the children, recognize the need for a voice for our children, that we do not want to see these children come back into homelessness down the line. We want to move the families on and support them to have the skills and sustain tenancies. So child support workers are something that we have in the organisation, and we're increasing our child support workers to look at youth homelessness and to prevent and to skill build the children, to give them those skills to move forward and to work through the traumas that they experience. At the moment with COVID-19, the child support workers on my team, I have 7 on the team. And to show you the contrast, I suppose, there's 7 child support workers, but there's 31 case managers working with their parents. So there is a deficit of child support workers. Only about 10% of the children have child support workers, which just shows the need for more. We need to put more into the youth of today and the young homeless clients to give them the skills to move forward. But there's lovely things happening at the moment on the teams. We are working remotely with the children. I never would have thought a few months ago that we'd be Zooming with children. We've had very creative ways of engaging them, from dropping off art packs to the children in all the hubs, obviously maintaining social distancing, and doing art activities online with the children. We've been doing hide and seek, lots of different games with the children in their cramped conditions to try and engage them and check in with them. And we're seeing the trauma they're experiencing. When Annette mentioned they're working in the Glenside, I'm literally across the road from the Glenside. I live in Churchtown, Annette. And my children were here in this room the other day and doing Zoom karate online with their sensei, and the sensei was giving them all the instructions, and they were working around our lovely large playroom that's now half an office here. And I just thought to myself, how privileged that they can do karate and gymnastics, because the children we work with, they don't get those sort of resources. They get the interventions from ourselves, and we do have some organisations that are very, very generous and offer vouchers, and we do summer camps with teenagers and all that, but they don't have the same level of skill building opportunities in early childhood. Even back to the karate, it struck me that the sensei, my little lad who's 6, he was sent off to get a fridge magnet as a sort of an exercise as part of the karate. I was listening in and I could hear he was running around the house looking for bits. And it struck me, like, the homeless children don't have fridge magnets. They don't have fridges. They don't have that level of space in their accommodation. They have beds in a room that is quite cramped. So you can imagine, if there's addiction, if there's mental health going on, if there's issues going on in the family, it's just compounded by the cramped conditions and the difficulty that they're in. So what we do on the Family Homeless Action Team, and indeed in Focus Ireland, is that we're really focused to drive exits on from homelessness, and we're really focused to look at the generation of children to really prevent them. So we have a family centre, which is something that opened up in the last year, And the Family Centre provides a drop-in service for families. So of course the Family Homeless Action Team, we work with the families in their homeless accommodation. So we have a good connection with the Family Centre. We also have a mediation service, and the mediation service supports individuals who are struggling in their home with their parent, and a mediator will get involved to try and sustain them in their home with the parent if at all possible. So it's all around prevention and trying to prevent that intergenerational homeless piece. Let's see what else I wanted to talk about. So just to give you a case study, perhaps just around just one of the cases that we've worked with recently. So a young dad that would have grown up in care, in residential care. At 14 years of age, he was placed in care. When he left care, historically there aren't the supports for children leaving care, so they can become 18, they're out of the care system, and they're all of a sudden with no supports, trying to find their way around Dublin and accommodation and so on. So we do have aftercare services that support these children. This father unfortunately took the wrong path and became involved in crime. He became a young parent himself. Statistically, 25% of homeless families are aged 18 to 24. So there's quite a large cohort that are in this category. So he became involved with Focus Ireland. We liaised with his probation officer, our case managers. We supported him with our education centre, which is called PEAT. It stands for Preparation for Education, Training and Employment. He became involved in, he got work. He had 2 children and a partner as well. Because of his criminal history, there was difficulties with getting him into long-term accommodation because, of course, references were difficult, and he was deferred on the housing list. So after some time working with him, about 1.5 years, the deferral was lifted, and in the last few months he has now moved into his own home. Now, thankfully, because of the resources that we have our prevention child support workers working with his children in the home to help secure them, to not go down the same path as him, to work through the trauma that they've experienced. And I can't stress it enough that the very basis of somebody being homeless is a trauma. And I think that there's so much conversation around homelessness and it's a crisis that sometimes we lose the very meaning of what it is. It's children and parents behind those homeless figures. And he is just one family that we work with all the time. So they're doing really well at the moment, and the children are settled in schools. Our child support workers will remain involved for a few more months just to settle them. And then the plan is, what we always do is we try and find supports in the local community, so they have that support to fall back on, whether it's play therapy, drama therapy, whether it's good connections with the school teachers. Hopefully down the line they won't need the mediation service, but if they do, that's there as well. So we do offer really strong supports along the continuum of care in Focus Ireland to prevent families becoming homeless. I think that's pretty much all that I wanted to discuss today. I think I've hit on all the things that I had written down here anyway. So I look forward to your questions later on, and it was lovely talking to you all.
Thanks so much, Niamh. I think it's so interesting to hear kind of what is happening and what's happening now, but also what's happening in general, and kind of the way that you speak about homelessness, I think is really interesting as well. I think there's been some fantastic kind of areas come up with both of our guest speakers. So we might move to the Q&A now. I know that there's a few questions come through. If you want to move to the gallery view, which you should be able to do at the top right of your screens, and we'll pose those questions now. And I think the first few that came through are for Annette. So I might start there, if that's okay, Annette. Firstly for Annette, there's a question here which asks who your role models have been.
Yeah, you know, my role models, I suppose, generally tend to be strong women. I would have talked about the ladies in PayPal, but outside of my PayPal ladies, as I've kind of come through, people like Margot Slattery, and I know Julie O'Neill is on the call here. She's a mentor for me and has been a great help. And men as well, I've had some very strong male mentors too. I mentioned Jerry Culligan, who was my boss when I was in Aircom, and now from a role model perspective, I look at my current CEO and my CFO, who also leads the CS organization, John Rainey, and they just do not put a foot wrong, and you aspire to be like them. And at the very beginning of my career in Aircom, I worked for a guy called Ken Byrne, who works, I think at the moment, he's been to Ireland or one of those organizations, but he was always very pro looking after his workforce and his people. So I think, I've learned from that about being honest, being authentic, and I know that word is kind of bandied around a bit, but it really is true, being yourself. And that goodness will come through and people will see that. And if it's fake, they'll also see that too. So trying to do that. But so they'll be the kind of role models I would have had.
I have a question for you here as well. It's for Annette. It says, I have been so inspired by your story, not dissimilar to mine with regard to growing up and pausing during those early years of family. I've worked hard in my current role, but feel that I've hit a plateau for the past year, and have toyed with moving on to offer what I have achieved. So I think kind of what advice would you give around that?
Go for it. I really would, because if you're even thinking about it, you're not actually 100% committed to the role that you're in at the moment. So I would certainly put the toe out there, and I would absolutely start to spruce up on your skills, really figure out what your values are, what companies match those values, what your ambitions are, how you may need to change or pivot, and what makes you happy. You're in work for a long time. During the week, you're doing your 8 hours a day or whatever it is, and it's really important that you enjoy what you do. It's called work for a reason. It's obviously work, but something that you're really, really passionate about. But like I said in my earlier conversation, there's I can't think of any example of somebody who has moved on from a role and hasn't been happy with that decision. Even if it's in your head, that voice is telling you to go, and you need to go.
Thanks. I've got loads of questions coming in, so I feel like I'm going to try and rattle through as many as we can in the time that we've got left. Sorry. So fascinating talk from Annette, full of honesty and great advice. My question for her is related to her comment about being a shy child and then obviously becoming hugely successful and inspiring and confident woman. As lack of confidence is frequently an issue for women, was there a moment when Annette made that breakthrough from shyness, or did this take years of hard work?
Look, again, I mentioned when I started working as a lounge girl, that really was a point that I changed. I felt that I was, much more confident, had to be much more confident in that little role. But it does take years of hard work. I was given some constructive criticism one time around presentation skills, and maybe I should go to elocution lessons was the advice I got. And of course, next time you get up for a presentation, your nerves are shot. And it took years to come back from that. And things like joining speech masters and Toastmasters, as it was, things like that really help bring you on. But also, that years of practice is, one of the mentors in my earlier years said, never say no to a presentation or an invitation to speak. And I never have. I will always take every opportunity, even though I may hate it. Or be really, really nervous about it, or really shy about it, or don't feel the subject matter expert. I will take it, I will learn the subject, and I will put myself out there every time, because the one time I say no, I'll continue to say no thereafter. So I know I will never back away from that. So really having to push yourself the whole time, and again afterwards, you always feel great for having done it. So it gives you the confidence for the next one.
Great. So I have a question here for Niamh. Niamh, what was the most difficult challenges for families experiencing homelessness during COVID-19?
That's a very good question, because my first few weeks of COVID-19 was quite stressful, because we had families ringing us, if you can imagine what it might have been like in your own home. I know for myself that I stocked up on pasta and toilet paper and various things that some people panicked about. Homeless families were panicked around actually reaching food. Some of the homeless hotels that our families live in, they're not near shops, they're near a garage or they're near a McDonald's that had closed, and that's their day-to-day meals. Now, of course, they can come into our family centre now that we have that, but not all come in on the distance if they're not near it. So some families were quite panicked around, would the hotel continue to provide them with food? Would there be the catering teams there? Would they be isolated with no money? Would their payments stop? Very, very basic needs. If we look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, these are very, very basic needs that these families had to worry about when we were all worrying about looting the shops or whatever we were trying to do to survive, to get through the crisis. So that was quite a difficult one. There have been some positive pieces as well around the supply, the increase from Airbnbs flooding the market now that we've had many more move-ons into the private rented sector. So there are some positives, but the initial shock was much more compounded, I feel, for homeless families than it was for everyday people. I think you're on mute there, Amy.
That's always the thing. I put it on mute and then forget about it. I have another question here for yourself, Niamh. Thank you for the great talk. Vital and inspiring work being done by Focus Island for children and families. So this is from Maeve. My question relates to the relatively small number of child support workers compared to adult family workers. What is the main impediment to having more child support workers? Is it financial, training, or another reason?
The main impediment is finance, really. You know, like what I find on my team is that I have to cherry pick the children that are most in need. It's an awful expression and I'm deliberately using it to be dramatic because it is what's happening, that I have to pick the most traumatized children to have a child support worker. So we have many children waiting to be allocated child support workers. We only have 5 child support workers working in the 24 locations all over Dublin that we support families in. And we only have 2 child support workers working in prevention. So when a family moves on out of homelessness, they visit them in their home. So we really have to look at the children that are most in need. And if you look at the health system at the moment, you know, there's very long waiting lists for CAMS, which is the health support for, you know, children with mental health difficulties. So we would often try and make referrals as well and support children with funding to have psychological assessments to support them as well. I don't want to sensationalize it, but we do have some children that would be self-harming and some children that are in great difficulty. So that is the main reason. It's finances, unfortunately, and the main focus with some funders maybe to move families out of homelessness. But we as in Focus Ireland, we are very focused to make sure that these children don't turn up to Focus Ireland down the line. We in a respectful way, we don't want to see these children again. We want them to move on and be happy. I hope that answers your question.
That's great. There was a quick question here for me, which was around the 4 out of the 5 recommendations that Focus Ireland, so which was the recommendation that didn't end up in the programme for government, and that was around a family strategy. Similar to how we asked for a dedicated youth strategy where housing and homelessness was concerned, we were looking for a dedicated one for families. But it is something that we will still advocate for and try and be made a priority over the coming years. And in a moment when I wrap up, I'll talk about youth homelessness being part of our 5-year strategic plan, but family homelessness is as well. So it's still critical to the work we do and the work that we'll be trying to drive, not only in frontline services, but from an advocacy and policy point of view as well. There are some more questions, but we're nearly out of time, and to make sure that we finish on time, I might just wrap up if that's okay. And what we might do is to see if we can answer some of those questions offline and come back to you on them. So we won't just let them go. We'll pick up on those if that's okay. But firstly and foremost, I want to thank Annette and Niamh for joining us this afternoon. I think both talks were really inspiring, and I mean, we covered so many areas and quite a lot of personal content as well, which is very inspiring, very moving, and thank you for being so honest and sharing so much with the group. I want to thank everybody that's attended as well. I know that COVID-19 has been a challenge for us all. And I now think that for organisations like Focus Island, we know that post-COVID there was going to be an increase in demand for our services, and it's probably likely to happen at the same time as a decrease in our funding. So if you're interested in what you've heard here and would like to support our work, I'd really like to strongly encourage you to become a member of the Circle. The Women's Philanthropy Circle is a really unique group of women like Annette that come together to support vulnerable young people, many of whom are care leavers, to help them get a better start to their adult life. The Circle ensures that they have the education, the work, the skills, and most importantly, the self-belief in themselves to reach their full potential. And that's something that we've heard a lot about this afternoon. Ending youth homelessness, as I mentioned, is going to form a major part of Focus Island's new 5-year strategy, which will start in 2021. And the commitment in the programme of government means that the support of the Women's Philanthropy Circle is now more important than ever in helping us find solutions to end youth homelessness. And we know that we can end youth homelessness. So the team will be following up with everybody after the meeting, and during those follow-ups we will try and answer some of the questions that we didn't manage to get to this afternoon. So please take the opportunity to engage with them and ask any questions that you might have. We would love it if you would consider being part of the next phase of this journey and to help us end youth homelessness in Ireland. So I think the only thing left to say is thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you to our guest speakers, to Annette and Niamh, and we hope you have a lovely weekend. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Amy, for having me.